The Northman is based on a Nordic legend which Shakespeare later drew on as source material for Hamlet. Prince Amleth is on the verge of becoming a man when his father is brutally murdered by his uncle, who kidnaps the boy's mother. 2 decades later, Amleth is now a Viking. He soon meets a seeress who reminds him of his vow to save his mother, kill his uncle, and avenge his father. In many ways, the Northman develops and refines the interests director Robert Eggers first showed in 2015's The Witch, which took the macabre elements of New England folklore to create a film of meticulous historical accuracy infused with supernatural horror. Here, Eggers is at his best. The film sets the benchmark for depicting a world that feels a vast distance back in time, still more primitive than modern, of brutal conquest, brief lives, scarcity, the threatening and scarcely yielding enormity of nature with its bleakness and tempests, and the absolute convictions and shaping nature of mythology and the occult. The mixture of ultra-realistic historical elements, from costume to varieties of wood and building materials to ship structures, with a mysticism of rituals, visions, prophecies, portents, and symbols, makes for viscerally intense viewing. The dialogue often comes across as direct and uncomplicated, but is actually quite rich and elevated here and there with lyrical touches. This furthers the effect of evoking a distant time where such brutal and primitive conditions, toiling daily for meager and uncertain survival, and individual worth, overwhelmingly determined by physical prowess or utility, would have made language and expression a far more limited and pragmatic element of life. The sense of being in a near-primitive time is conveyed in most shots, from the terror people must have felt during night storms at sea, the chattel female slaves, their necks in iron at what is the Good King's castle, and perhaps the greatest feature of all, the sense of a regional and historical hardiness, of being bred and raised in exposure to rain, sleet, mist, and viciously cold temperatures, a feature that lasts throughout the entire film, of an early historic folk, from pre-modernity, honed and hardened to icy oceans and rivers and bitter cold. This brutal hardiness is also expressed with almost unique brilliance during the fight scenes, where, in contrast to the engagements in battle of so many other films and TV shows set in similar periods, there is a proper emphasis on the heavy physical exertion and dominance of each strike, grapple, and heave. Rival combatants visibly sag and wilt under the battering of a stronger opponent, and seem to mentally shrink into anxiety and blank fear as they are overpowered and about to receive a fatal blow. The sinuous camera work is unobtrusive and naturalistic, and you are only really made aware of how flowing it has been when it shows warriors sitting and recovering after a battle, with the camera holding on them in a static shot. There is a score of slowly throbbing percussion, strings and droning layers, and raspy wind instruments that never overwhelms the film or batters away at the listener's senses, as so many modern soundtracks do. To the fullest extent, the music is integrated into the action, in the primal dances around fires with their flurries of sparks, or when drums are being ritually struck. In a modern cinematic landscape full of overpowered and in-your-face strong female characters, the Northman's female characters, Anya Taylor-Joy's Olga and Nicole Kidman's Queen Gudrun, are influential and have agency in subtler and more engaging ways, with character arcs and decisive actions, and both are adept at navigating and usurping the limitations of their positions. Unfortunately, what was shaping up as an epic film, which might even have been destined to be a classic, begins to noticeably ebb in its second and third acts. Once the action shifts to the settlement in Iceland, where Alexander Skarsgård's Amleth has infiltrated as a slave to stalk his uncle and rescue his mother, the setting becomes largely limited to bland, grassy terrain in neutral light. There is, simultaneously, mysticism that we the viewer accept as real, and mysticism that is in fact brought about by chemical effects of hallucinogenic mushrooms and other natural substances. And these otherworldly and mere psychedelic experiences become a little jarringly mixed. Momentum sags further because, while Skarsgård, Taylor-Joy and Kidman are excellent, there is none of the supporting star power that is such a treat in the first act. Ethan Hawke, Willem Dafoe, and Björk as a seeress. The third act almost slips into conventionality. There is repetition of tropes, with visits to yet another seer or mystic, and many quests within the larger quest, including claiming a sword from a phantom warrior, all of which starts to feel a little Lord of the Rings in tone, and there is a slight sense of deferral of the inevitable final showdown, which saps the narrative tension further. A sweeping epic has become very narrowed in literal geographic space, momentum, and visual elements, and feels bottlenecked as a film. And as a viewer, you become decoupled from Amleth's wrath, just as it is supposed to be escalating, and instead, you watch a little passively, waiting for the final scenes to play out. All in all, the film is still a brilliant watch, its first half pushing into new territory in the depiction of a distant, early historical time, when mankind was still very primitive and formative. The Northman, in that sense, sets the benchmark for early historical depiction, and for all its lack of momentum in the latter stages, it's still an essential watch.